Good evening. Our special session, study session for December, what is this? 9th, thank you. December 9th is now in session. Council, how do you want to do this study session? I've heard requests of opening it up to questions from the audience. Do you want to keep it the traditional study session format? Do you want to open it up to the public? What's your druthers?
Can we wait and see how long it takes to get through the consultant's presentation and all of our questions, and then see if everybody's burned out by that time? And
I'm okay with that if you are.
The only other thing I would add to that is the possibility of having the district board and the Highlands Ranch board be able to ask questions as well, because they're part of the governing body for this, and having them the ability to answer questions, I think, is also appropriate for tonight.
right, if we were in the other room, I assume they'd be sitting at the table and part of all the discussion. So I hope they feel comfortable joining in tonight, since they are part of the governance of this whole thing. So
Well, I'd like a way either tonight or in another meeting to hear from other people on this, but we might at the very least ask people to let us know their questions, even if we don't have time to respond or discuss. That way we'd have some larger feel, because a lot of people have come out in some mighty darn cold, exciting weather to be here.
most of them have uniforms on. So.
Well, I see Terry Nolan and Nancy Jensen from Highlands Ranch, and I see Cindy Hathaway, and is that Ron Lozier next to you? And Ron, and who else from your board? David and, sorry? Mike Easton, okay. Sorry. All right, you want to do your presentation then?
Mayor, just before Tom comes up to the podium, let me talk a little bit about expectations, because I know I talked to a couple of council people, and this might help you as you get through the evening. As Phil Cortese said in his cover memo when we sent this out, really tonight's an information session. We're not asking you or any of the elected people to make any specific decisions. If you have, as Dr. Cole pointed out, if you have questions, clarification, or if you want to give us some direction among any of you collectively about what some of these items that you hear that you'd like to see more on more quickly, we'd like to hear that tonight. For many of you, we did a study 2 years ago with Tom and his team of the police department. And the process there was we had kind of an action plan that we followed up with. And we worked with the department, and we went through, we prioritized items that came up. We broke them down into time frames. We established some target dates. We established some priorities. And I think by all accounts from the council and citizens in Littleton, it was a very successful process. Now, in this instance, as Phil pointed out, we said there were 95 recommendations. There were actually 108. So there was an awful lot of material here to digest. Now, many of these are more internal management issues that I don't expect the policymakers would be particularly concerned with. There are others that either have budgetary implications or big policy issues that we would expect at some point in time to be back in front of the city council and the boards. But if you want to talk a little bit more about process after you've heard the presentation, the staff is certainly prepared to address that. Okay? So with this, Tom Essenson is a principal with OEC, and Tom will introduce the rest of his team that did this work for us.
Great, thank you.
Tom, why don't you pull the microphone a little more toward you
Okay,
to make sure he's picking you up on the
Okay. Do we not have a, oh, there it is. There we do. Okay, there you go. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Again, I'm Tom Essenston. We are Organizational Effectiveness Consulting, and we are the ones who completed the operational efficiency study of the Littleton Fire Rescue. I want to introduce my team members. We have, on the left, we have Dennis Downs, in the middle, Sharon Thomas, and on the far right, Rich Thomas. All four of us spent extensive amount of time here on site, talked to a number of council members, a number of members of the board, spent a great deal of time with the employees within LFR, both at the management as well as the line level, and looked at a great deal of data and information, yielding 108 specific recommendations. Please do not ask me to cite them by line. Before we kind of get into this, I want to point out a couple things. One is to compliment and thank Chief Mullins and his entire organization. They were phenomenally helpful. They were gracious. They welcomed us. They worked with us. They spent a great deal of time with us, and it made our work tremendously easier. And so thank you, Chief Mullins, and thank your entire organization for that. Specifically, and I know he's getting tired of hearing this, and it's called out in our cover letter, but we were remiss to not mention in a very public arena Captain Randy Glanville. Randy is administrative captain within Littleton Fire Rescue. He was a principal point person, our liaison person. He was our go-to guy. If we ever had any questions about information, we would call him and he would come back to us sometimes within 13 and a half minutes, which may be a response time issue. And we were particularly grateful for his assistance. We could not have in any way completed the level of the thoroughness of work without Randy's assistance. So again, Randy, thank you personally for your work. What was laid out in terms of what it is we tried to accomplish our study objectives? Well, one was a key issue of interest was to assess LFR's overall response time. What were the response time to various calls of service? And what were reasonable performance indicators in terms of key areas? What were our recommendations in terms of whether or not those response times were adequate, or were they targeted response times that from policy perspective ultimately you would like to set and try to move the organization move towards those targeted performance areas. Given that, to determine the adequacy of the current resources, not only in terms of current resources to deal with the existing workload, but to the degree there were some specific performance targets which were established, the ability of LFR with its current resources to meet those performance targets, and some discussion about the potential issues about resource availability long-term as the communities being served continue to change and grow and transition, and there continues to be infill and some business development within the area served by Littleton Fire Rescue. Third issue was to evaluate the adequacy of training. Training is an absolutely critical, essential aspect of the fire service. To look at LFR's approach to training, look at its adequacy, look how it gets handled, how it gets dealt with within an operational arena, and what recommendations we have in that area, and specifically as a partner in the Metropolitan Fire Training Center, a facility that you are part owner of, and there's some shift of participation that was some long-term approaches to that particular capital asset. To do a cost utilization study of some specialty teams within LFR, there are several specialty teams. 4 of them were called out specifically to look at what those specialty teams do, what is their benefit, what is their cost, and what is the utilization rate, and what is the implication in terms of their long-term viability and the level of service associated with that. To assess the current fees within LFR, there are a number of fees for service. There certainly is transport fees for medical transports. There are a number of fees associated with building permits and building inspections and other related issues. There are special permitting fees for special events. Look at that fee structure, look at a little bit within the current marketplace here within the Denver metro area, and make some recommendations in terms of are those fees appropriate? Are there additional opportunities that you could look at to charge fees for, and or does it require some adjustment in the current fee schedule? To look at the overall structure and managerial systems within the organization, particularly looking at accountability and decision-making processes, were those working effectively and were those yielding good results. And all along the way, in whatever way we could ensure full participation opportunities for the governing board members and the employees of LFR. Those are kind of a summary of the study objectives we were tasked with. To go about this, we did a great deal of data analysis. There was a separate contract relationship with the International City Managers Association. They took all the operational information coming out of the computer-aided dispatch system and did a very thorough analysis and produced a great deal of information. If you read the report, you had an opportunity to read the entire report. There are a number of graphs and charts. Information which specifically came out of that study is referenced accordingly within our report, and there is a standalone document from ICMA, which, if you would like to read a lot of data and numbers, that might be of interest to you along the way. We did a great deal of look in terms of financial analysis, since there are a number of cost-related questions from the policymakers. We got cost information not only internally within LFR, but also worked extensively with the Littleton City Department of Finance to gather that information and try and establish some true costs for different types of services. We had 2 online surveys. We asked the members of the 3 policy boards to conduct an online survey and also requested all employees of LFR to complete an online survey. We were particularly pleased with our response rate. Both of those, there was a response rate of 75 to 80% of those surveys, and we were very appreciative of that. The purpose of those surveys was to help us get a better handle in terms of what are the types of issues we needed to target in terms of our inquiry. Conducted a large number of individual interviews, certainly with some of you as council members, and some individual interviews with the Highlands Ranch Board and the Fire Protection District Board, and also a large number of individual interviews with different employees within the organization at all levels. We had some specific focus groups in which we brought frontline employees from Littleton Fire Rescue together to look at some targeted specific issues we want information and responses to. And then we did, again, some comparative analysis of some of your surrounding jurisdictions, all that resulting in the report that you have available to you at this point in time. What we like to do in this presentation is just kind of quickly address the big, large-scale issues and some quick thoughts and ideas, and then maximize the time in terms of opportunities for questions and clarifications. One of the big issues was governance. Now, while there is a contractual relationship between the City of Littleton and contractual relationship in terms of the type and level of service it provides to Highlands Ranch and to the Littleton Fire Protection District, while there's a contractual relationship, we would strongly encourage that the entities move towards making it feel like a partnership. And in that sense, we have recommended that the creation of a policy advisory board with representatives from each of the 3 entities, as well as appropriate city staff, to provide a single opportunity for communications, a single opportunity for information exchange, a single point of contact where the Littleton Fire Rescue management staff, the chief and others, can go to, and instead of having to go 3 different places and try and figure out who's saying what, where there's consistency and inconsistency, a single point. That group would assist in terms of early on within budget preparation, recognizing again that the fire department is an operational department within the City of Littleton and needs to be responsive in terms of the budgetary process and budgetary structures of the city, that the other 2 entities, as a member of that policy board, specifically participate in budget preparation times. And we suggested over time, not an immediate issue, but over time, that the 3 entities really look at the issues of facilities and apparatus ownership. There are a variety of different schemes, I don't mean that negatively, but a variety of different ownership schemes about facilities and apparatus. That creates some complexities and around issues in terms of aligning different apparatus, different places to maximize operational performance. We believe LFR needs to implement what we would consider some standard managerial practices, that the executive team needs to work more closely as a single entity in terms of focusing on overall departmental organizational goals, not just divisional goals, that there needs to be some specific goals and objectives, even within the annual budgeting process, that LFR sets as benchmarks for what it wants to accomplish in the short term. We strongly suggested that LFR needs to significantly enhance its strategic management capacity. It needs to be as much focused on problem prevention as it is on problem solving. It needs to have both a short-term and a long-term perspective, and we have suggested a specific approach to that, and that the organization at the appropriate time develop a strategic plan that provides some long-term guidance on key issues. We believe it's important that some standard accountability system be put in place within the organization to ensure consistency of application of policy and procedure, that there are ways to enhance internally organizational communication so everyone gets the right information at the right time in the right way that helps them do their job better, and that there are ways to enhance opportunities for employee involvement in terms of looking at certainly critical issues that impact the day-to-day work life and the safety of the firefighters. Performance metrics. We strongly suggest that there be established some quantitative metrics to assess the organization's overall operational performance. And this is specifically the most critical one that gets talked about and debated and explored, and which some members of the public have some specific observations about, is the whole issue about response time. Now, if you read our report in detail, response time is a very complicated issue and has many different pieces. To make it simple, it has three components to it. One is how long does it take the dispatch processing time to occur, that is from receipt of call to the dispatcher gathering information, and then choosing the appropriate units to respond and contacting those units within the stations. The second is what we call turnout time. There's time, how long does it take the engine company or the medic company, once it receives that tone in the firehouse, to get its act together, get the appropriate equipment on, depending upon the nature of call, and get on their apparatus and start rolling out the door. And the third piece is travel time. That is physically, once that garage door opens on that station, how long does it take that piece of apparatus, or in most cases more than one piece of apparatus, to travel to the site of the incident. Our recommendations is that LFR set as appropriate goals that they need to move towards is that dispatch processing time. The dispatch processing time should occur 1 minute or less 90% of the time. That turnout time should occur 1.3 minutes or less 90% of the time. And that travel time will have a range depending upon, obviously, the distance, but more importantly, the nature of the environment in which they're operating, an urban versus suburban versus rural environment, that those travel times occur within that time or less 90% of the time. To help you understand what that means, again, dispatch time, we are proposing 1 minute 90% of the time or less. Currently, LFR has a dispatch time reaches 90% or less at the 3-minute mark, 3 times longer than our recommendation. That the turnout time, again, our recommendation is 1.3 minutes, and LFR reaches the 90 percentile at about the 3-minute mark, something a little bit less than 3 times longer than our recommendation. Travel time. That piece of the puzzle which there is very little control. It's a matter of physics over distance and time and speed. Our recommendation, again, depending upon the environment, urban, suburban versus rural, that the majority of calls for LFR are what we would class within the urban and suburban arena, the 5 to 6 minute travel time. For LFR, the 90 percentile travel time is not achieved until the, bear with me, 7-minute mark. And the overall total response time across all types of calls for service is that the 90 percentile performance level is not achieved until minute 11. So we're suggesting that some specific quantitative metrics be set, and that the organization and the policy boards work towards moving the organization towards those levels of performance. This is a hypothetical map. We worked extensively with your IT department to produce these. This is a hypothetical map. We're showing each of the 8 stations. What you see in terms of color coding is that it says a hypothetical 4-minute response time. That is, if you took the station and you determined how far a unit could travel in 4 minutes, those are what they are. Now, the reality is it's really about 6 minutes, because the 4-minute hypothetical model is based upon physical distance on the road and based upon posted speed limits. Reality is that very rarely, particularly in an urban environment, does a piece of emergency apparatus have the capacity to travel at the posted speed limit. So we really believe that while they said 4 minutes, actually that's about a 6-minute response time. as you can see, there are some gaps. The areas of white, here, certainly large segments of Highlands Ranch up here, and certainly down in this area. The areas of white are those areas which, just by the nature of laws of physics, distance and time, the standard of a 6-minute total travel time cannot be met with the current station location. Staffing is an issue. We think that there's some select areas in which staffing needs to be enhanced in terms of resources. We talked a lot about the business inspection function, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. That is an opportunity, we believe, a critical component of a preventative approach to fire safety, that LFR should implement a business inspection program where all businesses get inspected, we would recommend at time of their annual business license, and there'd be a fee associated with that. And certainly some businesses which operate in the night hours in which there are issues about overcrowding, be they bars or music venues, whatever the case may be, that those get inspected on a routine business. In order to do that effectively, you're going to need some additional staff. Again, there's a little bit of cost analysis on that. To the degree it is fee-based, and we encourage you to make it fee-based, there's a cost recovery on that. That we believe that in order to accomplish some of the things LFR needs to accomplish within the 108 recommendations is that there needs to be some additional selected clerical support staff to take on some of the processing paperwork to ensure things get done in a timely manner. We have recommended that at the appropriate time when resources are available, that the 2 aerial companies you have, that is Ladder 16 and Squirt 12, okay, Squirt 12, 2 aerial companies, go from a staffing of 3 up to a full-time staffing of 4. If you go to that model, that enhances the utility of that piece of equipment. It puts more personnel on the ground at structure fires. And it also then allows some particular specialty functions, a rapid intervention team. There's some detailed analysis report about that, to be co-located with one of those aerial companies and therefore maximize response and safety at critical incidences. We believe that your single battalion chief on each shift, at this point in time, they are maxed out. They have to cover 8 stations. They have to cover over 100 square miles. They need to have contact with their direct reports, which is 8 captains in each different stations. They need to have an opportunity to observe hands-on training to ensure the training standards are met and the performance standards are met. And they need to do so within 100-plus square miles, as well as respond to major incidences. We believe that that they are maxed out in terms of their capacity to do the job they need to do. So at some point in time, should there be additional stations within the district, you really need to seriously look at adding 3 additional battalion chiefs. So that would be 2 on each shift. And one of the key areas we've highlighted in the report is you need to you need to bring in some financial management expertise. Littleton Fire Rescue is a $16.5 million operation. It should be reasonably fiscally managed. There should be ability to track costs, to assign accountability, to ensure that purchases are handled in the most cost-effective way and in the safest way possible, that gets equipment and repairs done for the employees of Littleton Fire Rescue. And we believe that you need to procure that level of expertise within the organization. Medical services. We believe you need to enhance your capacity to provide medical services. Medical calls represent 74% of all calls for service received within Littleton Fire Rescue. If you take out what we call the routine assists, which are non-emergency calls, that jumps to 80% of the true emergency calls are medical calls in nature. You currently field 4 full-time medical units and 1 part-time medical unit. You ran an experiment on what was called Medic 16 for a period of time. You saw the results of that. We believe that there should be an immediately addition of a full-time 5th medic unit. That would do several things. One, it would increase the level of service to your community. Second of all, it would reduce the response time because you would have 5 units out there available for response rather than 4. Third, it would reduce overtime costs because that half-time medic unit, what's called Medic 10, is staffed principally on an overtime basis, which supports training opportunities for the other 4 full-time medic units. and that there would be an offset of those costs, not only in terms of reduced overtime from that what's currently called Medic 10. It would also, to the degree that that unit would be providing additional transport opportunities, there would be revenue from additional transports. We've made very specific that we're not recommending Medic 16 specifically. We understand why Medic 16 was located at the location it was. We recommend that you authorize and support an additional full-time 5th medical unit, and that LFR staff then needs to look at its entire jurisdiction, look at where the response and calls are, and locate those 5 units that are maximizing the organization's overall operational performance and addressing the response issue. And somewhere down the road, not immediately, somehow down the road, we believe there should be a serious assessment of the operational and fiscal impact of going to a full transport system. Full transport would be, meaning you would not require, or minimal support from ambulance company, that the vast majority of transports would be handled by LFR. And we believe that that could probably be done with 7 full-time units. And again, full transport has some significant additional revenue opportunities associated with it. We believe that there needs to be a realignment of the organization structure to enhance communications and efficiencies. That there is some disconnect between some of the units. We've seen from some of the divisions. We believe that the training division should report directly to the operations chief, because training is such an integral part of the day-to-day requirements of any firefighter, and the need to keep them trained and keep them current on skills, and the need to do that when they are in an operating environment on their shift. There needs to be enhanced coordination about that. The emergency medical services currently report to the operations chief, and we believe that should continue to go that way. And we believe that the communication center, which currently reports directly to Chief Mullins, should report within the support services division in terms of providing some reasonable balance within the organization, and also freeing up Chief Mullins' time to take on some more focus of some strategic issues. That's the recommended organization chart that we believe that you should move towards with time. Don't ask me to read that from here, because I can't. Support services. We believe that you need to realign the support services division to better enhance operations. The support services, which is currently headed by a division chief, we believe should be headed by a civilian manager. The nature about what support services should be doing does not require a division chief with that level of training and skill and background. It requires an individual with a high level of financial public sector budgeting skills. That the individual needs to have a very strong financial orientation to manage the day-to-day budget, to be the principal interface between LFR and the city's financial organization, to implement what we will consider later on. We'll talk about some key cost accounting mechanisms that need to be changed within the organization to better determine what different functions and different operations are costing. That this individual needs a background in finance, that this individual will provide oversight, not direct responsibility, but oversight for maintenance and apparatus and fleet maintenance. That the individual will track programmatic costs and manage the assets of, again, a $16.5 million operation. What's currently called the Fire Marshal, we believe needs to be renamed Fire Prevention and Life Safety Division. You need to significantly enhance this organization to improve public safety. That, again, we believe that you establish a business inspections program to increase the safety of businesses, a fee-based program, and again to ensure that high-risk businesses operating at night with significant overcrowding issues, bars and music venues and others, are routinely tracked to make sure that they're meeting fire codes, exits aren't blocked, overcrowding doesn't occur, and so on. That hazardous materials is a critical component within the organization, as in any, that we believe that the expertise in that area needs to be enhanced, not only in terms of being able to conduct hazardous material inspection, site inspections on a regular basis, but also have some unique specific technical competency of a chemist to assist and support those inspections and provide ongoing hazardous materials training to the employees in the organization. This is a piece of the organization which has a critical space need. It is significantly overcrowded. This is a case from our perspective as a consulting firm, one of the cases where we absolutely 100% believe that the lack of physical space is significantly hindering the organization's ability to do not only quality work but quantity work. And again, we believe that within this there's an opportunity to look at the fee structures across all fees charged within what we again recommend fire prevention, life safety division, the permit fees, the construction fees, the inspection fees, the special event fees, and other related fees within ARENA. Training division needs to be more effectively integrated. Again, we're recommending the training division become part of the operations division, that the training division needs to develop a specific 2-year training plan, that the organization needs to train to that plan, and people need to be held accountable that they're training to that plan. That in order to support this, we're going to recommend that one captain, that would be 1 out of 8 captains, on each of the 3 shifts serve as a training liaison for that shift to make sure that the training is going on, serve as that interface with the training organization within LFR. We believe that the battalion chiefs need to, again, provide direct observation and training to ensure that it's going on, that its quality training is meeting the needs of the operational personnel within the organization, and it is meeting standards. And you need to look closely at the Metro Fire Training Center. It is a significant capital asset that you have, in which some of your partners in that capital asset are going elsewhere. It has some issues around utilization. It has some issues around safety. It has some needs for upgrading to ensure that the burn building is meeting some safety issues as well as meeting some environmental impact issues. It has some businesses which have opened up around it, which are now going to be impacted by any burn going on in that arena. And it sits right next to a river, and you have some potential risk of inappropriate runoff from burns and other materials going into the river. So we suggest that there needs to be a really specific look at a long-term plan for approach to that facility and determine whether or not there are opportunities to create some revenue from that by making that facility available to other appropriate organizations and agencies. Place a high priority on facilities and apparatus. This is a very facilities and apparatus intensive business. If you don't provide enough focus on that, you impact the level of service, you impact community safety, and you impact the health and safety of the employees. That we're recommending that in each station, one of the 3 captains on each of the 3 shifts, one captain be assigned specific accountability for the overall station. That is, in the sense they own that station. They are not responsible to make repairs or get problems fixed, but they are the advocate for seeing that that facility is maintained at an operational level and maintained at a level which ensures a healthy work environment for the personnel assigned to that station. We're recommending also a captain on each shift in each station be assigned overall responsibility for apparatus and equipment. It's not their job to get things fixed, but they are the ones in which, if there's a problem within the apparatus or equipment, they are the advocate for. They're the go-to person. They're the ones who constantly watch out and make sure that things are not, that problems which are small problems are not developing into long-term problems because of lack of attention. There's been some issues and concerns about the interface between LFR and the Fleet Maintenance Organization within the city. That we're recommending that a single individual with LFR serve as the principal liaison with fleet maintenance, so there's a consistent point of contact, there's a consistent approach to how that relationship works with fleet maintenance, and that there's a single individual within LFR who assists in prioritizing fleet maintenance's work on LFR's apparatus. We think you need to establish a long-term plan in terms of fleet replacement, long-term approach to financing apparatus replacement, and also change some policies, spell out in the report, in terms of policies relative to your reserve fleet. How many engine companies, how many mag companies do you need to keep in reserve in the event of a critical incident or a principal piece of apparatus no longer being available or not available for some extended time? That part of a strategic plan is a long-term facilities plan, looking at the existing stations, and certainly in that context, looking at a long-term approach that there be appropriate for any additional facilities at some time in the future, a long-term facilities plan in terms of the viability of the existing 8 stations, which ones require maintenance, which ones require upgrade, and at what point in time might one or some of them require replacement. Somewhere in the future, we're recommending that LFR undertake a standards of cover study. This is a very detailed, exhaustive study which looks at the workload, it looks at the performance standards of response time, it looks at the nature of the topography, the urban, suburban, rural, and the nature of the streets and freeway systems, and basically lays out, based upon some policy guidance, what is the best recommendation relative to number of stations, location of stations, and appropriate apparatus to be located at each station. This is a very extensive study, and it's something that somewhere down the road LFR may want to look at. And we believe that there are some immediate repair and safety issues that need to occur on some facilities and apparatus. Things that are not being taken care of, we believe, for community safety and for employee safety, they need to be dealt with immediately, and those are laid out in the report. Specialty teams. It's our recommendation that the specialty teams within LFR, be maintained, but that they have adequate oversight in terms of their utilization and in terms of cost accounting. Some of the teams we think are not appropriately sized, that LFR needs to establish some maximum number of team members that are appropriate for the operational arena. Those are called out in the report. That those team members should be aligned operationally. That is, in some cases, all team members on a specific team should be located at a facility. In some cases, across all 3 shifts, some team members should be distributed across all 3 shifts, so that the critical need for a specialty team, you're not pulling in people from off duty and incurring the operations, so the overtime costs and the delay response implications. Each of the specialty teams needs to be a cost center in and of itself. So that all costs associated with that team, the training of that team, the equipment of that team, the overtime associated with that team is specifically costed out, so people can then truly say, this is the cost of that specialty team, and this is what it costs, and this is what you get in exchange for supporting that unique special skill. There's some opportunities in some of your specialty teams to establish a fee for service. By example, within your dive team, there are a number of times in which they are not involved in a life safety issue. They are involved in some property recovery, and we think it's appropriate on those types of calls that you look at a fee for service basis. And that periodically, those specialty teams get looked at, both in terms of utilization and in cost and in terms of benefit. Significantly enhanced financial expertise and oversight. Again, we're recommending support services manager with significant financial management experience, specific budget management responsibility, that within LFR, each division is established as a separate cost center, and again, particular specialty teams are established as cost centers, and that there be particular attention paid to overtime. Overtime is an inevitable part of the public safety business. I think we believe it's difficult, let me put it this way, we found it difficult to understand how overtime was being utilized, where was it going? Was it going to specialty teams? Was it going to backfill to maintain standard operations? Very difficult time tracking overtime. So we believe there needs to be a mechanism to put in place to truly understand where that time is going. What are the implications of all this? Well, one implication is we think that the 108 recommendations contained in this report do not require a restructuring of the governance relationship. We believe that the existing governance process, again, one which we would encourage, while it may be contractual, move towards a partnership feel, that the 108 recommendations report can be implemented within the current structure and do not require the necessity of moving towards a single authority or a single fire district. Many of the recommendations that contain the report, as the city manager indicated, require no additional resources, and we would suggest don't even require specific policy guidance from the policy board. They are internal managerial issues within the organization, and they can be handled within a standard managerial approach to doing business, and they are not cost implications, and they can be handled within the current LFR organization. that there are a number of recommendations which have some cost-related implications. These need to be prioritized. This is not the time to ask for more money in light of what's going on in the world, but reality is that some of the recommendations do have cost implications. Hopefully a lot of those cost implications are offset by cost recovery or cost savings on the other side of the equation. Those need to be prioritized, some not only in terms of short-term, mid-term, and long-term, but prioritized in terms of importance. And we recognize that inevitably it's the responsibility of policy boards, City Council, Highlands Ranch, and the Fire Protection District to create a balance between the professional perspective of the fire service, the community's perspective relative to its needs and expectations, and the reality of resource availability. And that inevitably is a balancing act that needs to happen. So in summary, we believe that LFR is a good organization and it can become a great organization. It is staffed with highly skilled, highly competent professionals who are highly committed to providing quality fire rescue service to their communities. That is our assessment that the three entities place a high priority on the fire rescue services. It's a critical component of their communities, and they place a high priority to ensure it gets taken care of effectively. And lastly, that we believe that one thing that needs to occur prior to anything is that the 108 recommendations require a thorough review by appropriate parties, and that requires, at some point in time, a detailed implementation plan that lays out sequence, lays out priority, lays out costs, lays out schedule, and lays out an accountability system.
Thank you. Questions? That includes the district and the ranch. I've got a couple. Are we capable of calculating the 90th percentile response times from the information we're getting from the computer-aided dispatch system on our own?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay.
Yes, that information is there, and we worked with dispatch around some query issues in terms of producing that result. And yes, you have the capacity on a routine basis. Yes, if you're asking on a routine basis, you have the capacity for your system to produce on a routine basis response time information.
Do we know how to do that?
Yes, now.
Yes, now? Okay. Second question I had is, if I remember correctly, I think you said in here that the year that Station 16 had the extra medic in it, that decreased the response time by 30 seconds. Was that your calculations?
Yes.
Okay.
System-wide.
System-wide.
System-wide, within the entire jurisdiction.
Obviously medical response, not fire response. Or 30 seconds for everything.
The answer to that question is yes, it was system-wide, but it was medical and fire calls together.
Okay, but since they're summed together, then that affected all of the calls.
It affected all the calls, that's correct. But keep in mind, 80% of your calls, when you take out
Are medical.
the routine assists, are medical.
Do we have information about what types of businesses the structural fires are in that we're having right now?
Within the jurisdiction?
Yeah, I mean, we have something like 130 some structural fires a year.
Right. We understand that there is a count of the number of businesses within the jurisdiction. I'm going to look. We have a number of businesses within the total jurisdiction.
No, which businesses have the fires?
Which businesses have the fires?
I mean, of the 132 fires, are they gas stations? Are they bars? Are they hazardous material dumps? Do we know?
We did not identify that.
Come down. Or
There's such a small, in totality of life, there's such a small number of them, it would not be difficult to give you that information.
Okay.
Mayor, do you want Chief Hofstra to respond to that?
Jim Hofstra, Fire Marshal. We do keep track of all the businesses that we have in the district. We also keep track of where the structure fires are. The overwhelming percentage of our structure fires are residential.
Residential?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Jim?
Yes, I am going to ask Mr. Woods. You probably had an opportunity to take a look at this. What is going to be your recommendation for our next steps?
Well, some of it will be based on the feedback that we get tonight. If between you and our partners, if you have some priorities you want us to look at, as I indicated in my introductory remarks, our expectation is to sit down with Chief Mullen and put together, as Tom talked about, an implementation plan. The model we have would be similar to the plan that we put together, as I mentioned, for the police department. And I can't remember how many recommendations we had out of that study. It wasn't this many. But we went through and sat down and prioritized, as I mentioned, and Tom mentioned, some of these are primarily internal management kinds of things, and sit down with the chief, see what our expectations are, working with his management team, plus the rank and file. For those of you who were here for the police study, if you remember, we put together a steering committee. We had representations from every level of the police department, frontline, patrol officers, detectives, civilians. It was a 360-degree view input of everything that was going on in the police department. So the implementation plan that Mr. Esselson mentioned was very similar to how we had approached the police efficiency study, and we thought that was a good model.
If you're looking at prioritizing some of these recommendations, and in that priority you come up with some that's going to require budgetary considerations, will that be given the, I guess, say the appropriate weight toward implementing in 2009, even though it has a budget consideration to it?
I'm sorry, I'm not tracking your question. Ask me again.
If you come up with your set of recommendations, and a lot of these recommendations have no direct cost, I guess I'm wanting to know, are you going to eliminate those that do have a cost because we don't have it in the budget, and neither do they?
Well,
in the budget?
I counted, and I may be off on this, but I think there was 9 direct cost recommendations, from the civilianizing some of the positions to adding some personnel on apparatus to going full-time with the medic unit. If we implemented all of those 9, if I recall, and I don't know if you guys did the math, I think the annual cost to the operating budget would be somewhere between $1.1 and $1.3 million. Now, that takes some prioritizing, obviously. So I think what we would come back to you with is a discussion from the priorities that we're seeing from the chief and his management team, perhaps what we hear from the steering committee, and then I think there needs to be some discussion with the city council and the other partners who help fund this, because obviously in this economic time, or sometime in no time in the near future, do I think that any of these organizations could take on $1 million to $1.3 million in operating costs. So the issues of what is the top priority in terms of personnel and apparatus, those medical response times, I think, as Mayor Clark asked, the team has said that there could be, they recommended an immediate or short-term reinstallation of the 5th medical unit. At this point in time, I don't know what that achieves for you exactly in terms of response times. What caught my eye was the turnout times and the dispatch times that said we could knock 3 minutes and 42 seconds off of total response times with just operating changes. So to what degree you or the partners want to put that $400,000 or $500,000 back in the budget? Yes, there's cost recovery through transport, but there will be some other things that we'll talk about. This council, having sat through the last 2 audits, will recall that we've had some extensive auditor review of our transport because it's a Tabor enterprise. And if you noticed, one of their bold recommendations was that for the transports to be successful, there needed to be a much more aggressive collection policy. That is an issue that I think, having been here when we set up the transport policy, that has some significant policy implications about how you want to be perceived in collecting from those transports. The other thing we haven't even considered that has been brought up before is whether you want to utilize private transport to a greater degree. So I think, Jim, there's a whole range of issues there that would have to be discussed before we would bring this to you in a full budget process.
I thought I heard Tom say that part of the costs for recouping cost for the 5th Medical Unit would come from the reduction of overtime for the current 4. I know that the fire department went through an extensive analysis for dispatch that said we can add 1.5 dispatchers to our personnel for the same cost we're having for overtime for the current people. I'd like that same type of analysis being done to look at this 5th unit, whether it's going to help pay for itself or not, and then what the increased fees that had to be in order to make it pay for itself.
Yeah, I won't quibble with you tonight about the dispatch and the overtime. I don't think it was an exact match. It would help reduce it, but I understand your point. The issue, though, that with all of those recommendations is to prioritize where do you get the most bang for the buck, and again, what your expectations are as a governing board, and the expectations if the partners are going to increase that funding. In my mind, it needs to be very clear what your expectations are before you put the money on the table.
Can I ask a question or make observation? I think there were some recommendations that didn't have costs attached that do have costs. For example, upgrading stoves and so forth to commercial grade didn't have a cost attached, because how do you know that? And they're not all being upgraded at the same time. It's one of the things that I recommended, I think, or at least alluded to when I came back after my visits and said, boy, I thought we needed much better equipment with stoves and refrigerators and washers and whatever, because of the extensive wear that it was quite clear to me they receive. So, you know, they're plus the facilities, which again, since I went out and visited, you know, I saw the shower thing that people are whacking their head on or slicing their scalp on or whatever, and holes in walls at one place that covered, I think, with a mirror at one place. So those kinds of things, although they're not anywhere near the cost of a major piece of equipment, still have costs involved. And I think they're important costs, important things. And before I forget, I want to say I thought this was an outstanding report. I wasn't here when the police study was done, but I worked my way through this one and was really pleased with the thoroughness. I'm probably eager to hear what the people who were involved in all this think of it, but certainly seemed mighty good to me to give us direction.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Again, we believe there needs to be an increased focus on facilities and apparatus, and we agree with you that there are some recommendations which are not cost-specific because we didn't do a detailed look-see in terms of when, for example, moving from a residential to commercial-grade stove, when is the appropriate time to do that in each station, certainly not all 8 of them at once. And so, but there needs to be some attention paid to that, needs to be some prioritization of that, and there needs to be, again, some fiscal reality about what types of dollars are really available and how do you prioritize that station's needs versus that station's. We very much, and there was a very detailed in an appendix, I don't recall which appendix of the report, kind of pretty detailed inventory of each station's and observations of issues and problems going on at each station. Appreciate your comment. I think it's important that recognizing that a fire station is not a typical commercial or governmental building. It is not utilized Monday through Friday. It is not utilized 8 hours a day. It is utilized 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. People live in it 24 hours a day. People work in it 24 hours a day. The stove, taking that for example, isn't used just to cook dinner. It is used multiple times throughout the day. And because of that, the wear and tear, even with the highest level of attention and consideration paid by the people assigned that station, the wear and tear on the on the structure and the wear and tear just on the routine equipment, be it holes in walls or be it cracked concrete and a variety of other things, is significantly greater than what you would normally expect in any commercial building or any traditional governmental use building. Sorry? Appendix 4 is very detailed, if you want to read a very detailed inventory of each of the stations.
Tom, since you're up. Are we in the same situation on tracking response time on calls with the fire that we were in the police? And the police, the calls that were in the computer-aided dispatch system for the police weren't categorized by urgency, for lack of a better word. Here, it seems like we've grouped all calls together, and we've suggested one set of response times or 3 sets based on geography, but that same 3 sets regardless of the urgency of the call. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm going to turn to Rich because he can answer that question much better than I can.
I'm the guy that worked with all the numbers on this.
I don't think your mic is on. Okay.
Why don't you come on up to the... Thank you.
I know this is only for the TV part, but all of the calls in the CAD system in fire, they are well categorized, and there's not a problem extracting information out of the CAD system that's reliable information, as reliable as you can get. There's not a problem of extracting information about response times, any piece of the response time for the entire assortment of calls that they respond to. They can and have the capacity and the capability to provide you response time data on that entire range of calls or any specific type. So I think that answers your question.
It does kind of. I guess, well, that's part of the question.
Okay.
The other part is you guys came up with a recommendation for response times. My question is, why wouldn't we have different categories of response time goals depending on the prioritization of the call? I mean, somebody that slipped in their bathtub that needs help getting up doesn't need as fast a response time as somebody that's suffering intense chest pain.
I can only respond to that in the context of, yes, there's a difference in the type of call. If you're dealing with a medical incident that involves a sprained ankle, you might not be as concerned about an immediate, very, very quick response as you would someone in a cardiac arrest. Obviously, there's a difference, and you're right, Mayor. But in the context of the fire service and police service studies and examination of response time and setting standards for response and so on, no one distinguishes at that level. They set standards to cover emergency and urgent calls, and that's what we're really talking about, urgent and emergent calls, which for the most part are all of the fire and medical emergency calls. Real fires, not routine assists, but real fires and real emergency, medical emergencies. We set that standard because it's not too terribly complicated to do. If you got down to the level you were referring to, that would be a monolithic task.
Okay. Another question on response times. Do you all have accurate figures for response times for the surrounding communities or surrounding departments?
No. And we don't, while we never think anybody is trying to be deceitful in their response times.
You don't trust it?
We don't trust the system necessarily that gathers the data. Depending on how you query the computer and what the parameters are that you enter into that computer, you may get very different answers to the same question. ICMA, and we do as a normal course of our business, we're very, very specific about the parameters when we query this. And the canned reports in a lot of CAD systems don't necessarily have such restrictive parameters. But I believe that if we went to West Metro and South Metro and applied the same parameters that were used in this report, we might find that the response times that they tout there are really different. And they could be better or they could be worse. We don't know, but because we didn't examine them, and that wasn't part of our study.
Okay. Because, you know, when we sit down to figure out what should the response times be appropriate, and obviously your recommendation means something in that whole decision process. I mean, we're faced with the same difficulty of that you articulated is how do you get accurate data from the others? And the only one that I know of is we've got this report that South Metro did a year ago, and the closest they come is they only do to the 80th percentile for dispatch. But when you take their 80th percentile for dispatch and then their travel and turnout time, they're at almost 10 minutes. The difference for us between the 80th and 90th percentile in dispatch is a full minute. I don't know if that applies to them, but if that did, then that would mean that we're basically at the same roughly response time that South Metro is. So,
And you could be. I don't know.
You know, and part of the argument that you articulated in the report is that people have questioned the standards because they're not implementable or not for reasonable costs that come down from the national organizations. So I'm wondering how we compare ourselves. Obviously, Denver's going through a discussion about that process right now with Denver Health and the fire department and who transports and what their response times are and things. All right, I have one more question. And this is capturing costs for the additional medical unit. Right now, my understanding is we transport all advanced life support cases.
For the most part, that's correct.
And the backup ambulance transports all basic life support.
Yes.
Thanks. So if we added an extra medical unit, we actually wouldn't increase the number of transports that we have. We would decrease the response time unless we started transporting basic life support. So since we're already transporting all the advanced life support, we're already getting as much revenue as we're going to get. So adding the $400,000 for the medical unit we're not going to capture any cost from additional fees doing that, unless I'm misunderstanding something.
I don't think it's quite that simple of a distinction. Those decisions are often made out in the field, and it's not an absolute automatic process. If you had a medical unit in service, you would likely transport more people than you do now, regardless of whether they were initially determined to be basic or advanced life support, and that's just a fact. And what you may end up doing with the 5th Medical Unit is you might take some calls and do the transport on some calls that are currently handled by your private provider.
But we had a 5th medical unit, and my understanding is we didn't do any basic life support transport. That the 30-second decrease in response time was with the years of experience having the extra medical unit at Station 16. And the figures that we got from the department, I believe, was that we did all the advanced life support, and Action Care at that time did all of the basic life support. So having the medical unit in place, I mean, from the year's experience, it didn't happen that way.
Right. And we weren't, in our report, we did not have, it wasn't within the scope of our work to do a complete analysis of that, and so I can just say we don't know the answer to that. I can't give you that answer. I think you're generally on the right track, though, but one of the things that I would suggest, if you are going to give serious consideration to the 5th Medical Unit, and we urge you to, if for no other reason than to decrease response time, is that kind of an analysis would need to be done. And there may be some adjustments in your current policy around who you transport and who you don't that could then additionally help offset some of the costs.
Richard, if I might, Mayor Clark, one of the other things that would happen is there are a certain amount of calls that you lose that considered leakage, where you have to have another ambulance come in and actually take that call for ALS because there are no LFR units available. So those would be an increase, and I don't know what that number is.
Okay.
Doug, at the same time, I heard Tom say if we went to 7 medical units, we'd be transporting almost 100% of the calls they get for emergency services, whether it's for basic or advanced or whatever.
Yeah. I guess the question becomes is, do we want to do that, and does that make financial sense? Because when we looked at that before, it didn't, or I should say, when
That's
the previous
part of the financial analysis I expect them to come up with.
And thank you. I think it's an excellent report. I think you all were very thorough. I was impressed with the detail.
Can I ask a question? Are we now then, in response to what you've already done, are we collecting the information about the district that the incident, the cause coming from, so that we can then do a little more analysis in a few months to see, is somebody having to come from another, out of the, a further station because this unit's tied up already in that same district?
We have recommended, the report lays out that when LFR went to what's called AVL, which was Automatic Vehicle Locator, the policy went to dispatch the physically closest unit, that unit which could, from travel distance, get there the fastest. We believe that's an appropriate policy. What they did in that process, as many other jurisdictions did, was they discontinued collecting that, what we call in-district versus out-of-district response. We have recommended they reinstitute the in-district response to be able to answer, if I understand correctly, the very question you've asked, which is how much of this travel time is a result of engine company 15 having to travel all the way into District 17, because engine company 17 is not available.
Okay, so my question, we haven't started capturing that yet, or we have?
Have you implemented that recommendation yet? We're trying to collect that in-district versus out-of-district response. I'm sorry?
Greg, why don't you answer to the mic?
So we are starting.
I think you said January 1.
This is Captain Glanville, just so we get it on the tape and the permanent record, responding to Dr. Cole's question.
We're set up to begin tracking district data beginning January 1.
Thank you.
Don't all the calls have a latitude and longitude with the address?
Yes, they do.
So couldn't you go back through the records and pull out the latitude and longitude? Because where you're really looking at is where the call came from, which fire station district that would be from. So, I mean, couldn't you just go back through the existing records and pull out the latitude and longitude from the calls and then compare them to the geographical area that'd be served from the station? I mean,
Well-
isn't that what you're basically doing?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, you'd have to reestablish district boundaries.
Yeah.
So there have to be
So
a
you-
policy choice in terms, and again, that map, what we put there was just a hypothetical map. We're not recommending that as the right district boundary. You may want to go back to the old ones if that makes sense. We don't know. You have to do that, and then, yes, it is a longitude-latitude issue. The ability then, under the current system, to know where the call is, the answer is yes, you can do that. To be able to easily match that with where the unit came from might be a little bit more complex, but I'm assuming,
They'd know but the unit number, which station that came from, so I would think, because they're numbered by the station, so. Anyway.
yeah, but yeah, presumably the answer is yes on January 1, be able to start they will start collecting that information and being able to configure it in a way that's going to produce a reasonable report for people to look at.
Mayor, it's just our experience that when agencies, and LFR is not the only one that's done this, when they went to AVL, they discontinued tracking calls by district. And the district here has nothing to do with Highlands Ranch District. We're talking about the primary response area for each fire station. That got lost. You could go into, by hand, in effect, you can go into your current existing data. There's enough information there that you could do that, but with 12,333 calls, that'd be a phenomenal. If we were dealing with 20 calls, we could give you the answer in 5 minutes. With 12,000, we're suggesting that they create a computerized way of capturing that data and being able to report on it conveniently and easily, and then we can answer your question, Doctor.
And then that helps us know whether the equipment is stationed at the right location.
That's right. Or if you need more capacity at one station versus another.
Yeah.
If it's always busy, or too busy too often, then maybe you need to add capacity and not necessarily a station, but just more capacity there.
For example, if you look at, there is some data in there which indicates the differential workload amongst the stations. Station 11 is significantly busier than some of the other stations. And so, again, there's a perfect example is, well, what's a good solution? One of the potential solutions, if the workload is a contributor to the slow response time, then one of the solutions would be, well, does Station 11 have the capacity to add for example, a second engine company? So that you've just increased the capacity within that district to reduce the number of out-of-district responses needing to meet that workload demand.
Yeah, or are they responding to some other station and you need to add it to the other station?
Yes.
Nancy or Cindy, do you have any questions? Or Terry or Ron or Dave or Mike? Anybody?
My name's Terry Nolan. I'm the general manager of the Metro District in Highlands Ranch, and I want to start by thanking the mayor and the council for inviting us to participate. Can't beat front row seats. I suppose Phil gets credit for that, but thank you. I would also like to say to Tom and his team, I think you did a great job. You worked hard and produced a really good report, and I appreciate that. I also want to say that the Metro District and I believe the people of Highlands Ranch are pleased with our partnership, and I will use the word partnership. Can it get better? It probably can get better. And I'll also say that we are pleased with the service we get from Littleton Fire Rescue. Can it get better? Probably. And I also want to say that I endorse Jim Wood's proposed process. I think that's the right way to go. Have him work with the fire department, prioritize committees, look at costs, come up with some recommendations and some timelines. And the Metro District is interested in being involved in that process to the extent that it involves level of service or budget. So, with that, I'll sit down.
And I'm glad that you brought that up because the reason why we undertook this study, well, there's a number of reasons. And all of them are really related to improvements is we think that we can improve the department, but that doesn't mean that we think the department is bad now. It just means that we think there's always room for improvement, and for us to not go out and look at how we're doing in ways that we could improve would be doing a bad job managing the assets and the resources that we have.
I do have, if I may, Ron Lozier, attorney for the fire district. I think one of the issues that I'll say troubles me is that the district has 3 stations, 13, 14, 15. And I know Highlands have 2 stations, 17, 18. I think I was troubled by what has been called out as deficiencies in those stations. Troubled because I wish the district board would have known about those deficiencies. I'm talking about the industrial type kitchen rather than a residential type kitchen. I mean, these are responsibilities that flies in the face of a monolithic authority type thing. We have the responsibility for our stations, and we attempt, and I think what has occurred is that the fire department has told us what is needed for the stations. And I'm troubled that the stations aren't at least what the study indicates they should be. So that is troublesome from the standpoint, and our budgeting process, of course, is over. But this is something that I think our district board will have to address in terms of just making sure that the facilities are sufficient when you think of the use that they have. And maybe the communications to the district from the fire department need to be upgraded in terms of what actually needs to be done there. So that's an issue that does create more of the partnership effect, is that the responsibility for the physical facilities is of the individual parties to the agreement.
Yeah.
That was one of the things I was going to bring up that I'd like to see in our recommendations is the firefighters having a little better quarters. The cramped quarters didn't sound good to me in here, and the bathrooms, ladies' bathroom, men's bathroom, too small, and I think we need to have recommendations on how that can be corrected. And I also think we ought to look into how we can increase some of our fees that shows in here. Like the dive team could charge for some things or go up to the same rate as the Metro Dive Rescue. I think there's a lot of places in here where it said we could increase fees, and we should look into that. I'd like to see that in the recommendations that we received.
I think, Ron, we share your concern, and the deficiencies were for the stations across the entire department, not just, as you saw in the report. And we had some specific recommendations on how to take care of them. One of them was assigning the captain or a captain on each shift.
Yeah, the overall recommendation was for the LFR to place a higher level of attention, managerial and accountability attention to that. Certainly, station ownership becomes a critical dimension in terms of how that gets handled, and what are reasonable standards of a station, and how do those, and if that's the approach, how do those standards get met across multiple owners of different facilities, and how it gets handled.
And how it gets communicated also.
How it gets communicated,
to the district board. And
again, our inventory was never meant to be an absolute exhaustive inventory. Our inventory of each of the stations is in Appendix 4.
Right, and Mayor and members of the boards, if I might, I will say that overall, and I did the assessment of the stations and apparatus, and overall the stations and apparatus are in good repair. What recommendations I made were the critical findings that really need to be taken a look at, and I'm pleased to see that all the entities here are committed to try to bring it up to a level that takes the type of use that a fire station does. So thank you.
John?
Yeah, just on a follow-up to that, I think this is really where the civilian manager, a financial person, comes into play. Having sat through many, many meetings of Littleton Fire Protection District where they were remodeling 2 stations, tune of several $100,000, and problems with contractors, problems with performance and insurance. I think here's where you need a civilian rather than a firefighter to work on these issues, to present budgets to the district. As you've discovered, the districts take care of their own stations, and I think they need all the help they can get. They don't have any kind of staff. It's almost, I don't want to call you guys volunteers, but elected volunteers, having to deal with a lot of technical issues. And I think there is where I think the districts would probably be willing to pay for that service as much as anything. It certainly probably would have been dollars saved in the remodel of the 2 stations if they'd had someone who could keep daily contact on those remodels rather than rely upon fire personnel.
Well, I'll just interject here, Council, because I work more directly with you, but to get back to the prioritization, if you recall, you've had budgets where we had 22 proposed positions, all had merit to them. So in this instance, I think there's probably, if you add them all up, maybe 10 or 12 positions if you look at the some of the positions. So this prioritization is not that they all don't have merit, but to come back to you and say, out of all that, then who goes or what goes first, and how do you fund it, and then what waits, what gets in the line. So I think, John, that's the kinds of things we need to be looking at and coming back, because there's going to be a pro and a con to all of this as to where we put our resources, because as you know, there's only so many resources to go around. So I'll just kind of keep harping on the prioritization process.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have a question in terms of process. What kind of timeline do you see for establishing priorities and moving along?
Well, I would hope we'd have an initial cut within the next 30 to 60 days. Because, as I said, some of these things, there are some, over 70 of the recommendations had no cost implications. Well, or they weren't known. I mean, like the space needs, the $1.1 million to $1.3 million that I gave you are just pure operational costs. This team didn't have any chance to assess the space needs that they talked about, and certainly this council understands or knows that we've got already a priority space need with police that we're trying to solve, so we'll have to kind of get in line with that. But I'm hoping to sit down with Chief Mullen and come up with sort of a template, a format that sorts some of these out. What are the things that would have to come back as part of a 2010 budget process? What are some things that could get going immediately? What are some things like the Fire Training Center, which we've been talking about, that may take 1 or 2 years? We've got to go to the partners that we're going to have left there, like the city of Inglewood. We need to sit down and talk to them about their budgeting process. So I kind of see a number of different tracks, Dr. Cole. Some of the things that I think if we can get going on immediately, some of the things will start the prioritization process if we're going to come back to you and the 2 boards for the 2010 budget process. Did I answer your question completely enough?
Yeah. Well, are the boards going to be involved in some of them? I mean, I was scribbling. I scribbled in what I read, but then during the presentation I scribbled some more that I thought, geez, I don't know about you. If I get up in the morning and I can accomplish even the smallest thing, then it gives me confidence and makes me think I'm attending to things. So it seemed to me there'd be some things we want to prime the pump with, so that we have a sense that we're beginning.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I meant by short-term objectives. I mean, if there's some immediate things like a shower stall or something's dangling off of a sun visor, we ought to be able to prioritize that and say, somebody go out and fix it. There are some other things, like some of the organizational kinds of things that affect people's careers, that have much longer term impacts, that we'll put in this more contemplative. This needs to be looked at much more closely. I mean, Tom mentioned this not cost of service, but standard of service covers. So it sort of depends on the level of complexity, and that's what I'm saying. That's what we did in police. In police, there were some things we were able to get going on in 2 weeks. Others, for example, the false alarm ordinance, took quite a bit of research, because that took legal action on the part of the city. That took some outreach to residents and businesses that were going to be affected, who were going to be fined or penalized. So I see us putting together, again, this timeline. Some things we ought to be able to get going on almost immediately. Others are going to take either legal action or budgetary action, and it'll be in this somewhere down the road.
Some of the fees would take a little time to look at, or fines or whatever, but it would seem to me that several of the fees that were recommended, things to have fees or to increase fees, wouldn't take too long. And if we're going to do fee increases or institute fees, the sooner we do it, the more we bring in the pennies to help pay.
Yeah, and I guess that's why in the scoping, Dr. Cole, when you say it doesn't seem like it would take so long, but when you set up a fee, you got to have a collection mechanism. Maybe that gets back to the financial management. That's why I want to sit down with the chief and his team and talk about sort of where do these get slotted, and who needs to go look at it, who needs to come back and say, if we implement this, does it take an ordinance on the part of the city council? Does it take contacting vendors?
Yeah, and I didn't mean to imply what I must have said. So I'll rephrase it, that if we say, gee, we think fees are important and we know that it's going to take several steps, then we initiate the various things. We start in the order you're saying, and within a few months or 6 months, maybe we've got all that accomplished. I mean, I don't. You're the one with the experience on that. So.
Well, and to some degree, for those of you who didn't see the police process, but we had a matrix that we sent out to every month, and it had target dates, it had responsible parties. Some of it we had committees that went off and researched something and then came back to the steering committee. We had completion dates, and so you were able to kind of follow. It was kind of a scorecard, and you were kind of follow every project, what the status was, whether they were running into issues or not. There were some computer issues, some online reporting issues. That's kind of what I have in mind. But at this point in time, we're all still digesting this. And I just simply haven't had a time to sit down.
And just so one little question.
Yes,
with that. So with the scorecard, is that who gets to see that, and how do they see it?
In this instance, we sent it out to the entire police department, and the city council got copies. If we follow that same model, I would expect that we would send it out or have it online for all of the LFR personnel who have an interest, and the 3 governing boards.
Okay, so part of what I'm thinking is, one of the things is said in here, keeping the employees, the police, the fire employees aware of what's happening here, so they can, and council and so forth.
Yes, ma'am.
But that the fire folks would get to see that.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I think,
Like,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me make a quick comment. To LFR's credit, they've already begun work on some of these things. Those recommendations, which have no cost implications, which are internal, and by example, again, the ability starting on January 1 to reinstitute that in-district versus out-of-district response. They are looking at very quickly changing some of the dispatch some of the protocols within dispatch to try and deal with reduction of some of those dispatch processing times. And so I think as we've identified some issues even along the way prior to our even producing a draft report, some critical opportunities for LFR to rethink how they do some components of business and get some significant benefits from implementing. They've already taken on some of these issues, much to their credit.
Well, that's what I thought, so.
I would think that we would want to make sure that any fee increases that we propose goes back through both boards, since that affects the constituents of both of your boards. And then, Jim, you had something?
Well, this comment was related to the space needs, administrative space needs. I just want to remind council at our workshop, we've got two topics. One is dealing with funds, and the other one is dealing with police needs. And it depends on how the decisions come out of the police needs study, we may solve the problem for the fire administrative needs as well at the same time.
Maybe. Any other questions?
Just an observation on that. Part of the space needs that they talked about are more immediate than whatever we do to solve the police needs, as I understand it. Right? I mean, there are a couple that are you're recommending some fairly quick attention to.
Yes.
Just in terms of equal time, I don't know that Chief Coogan would agree that those are more immediate than the police department.
No, but I mean, if
He's not here,
if we
I'll-
build a building, it's going to take a little while to build a building as opposed to
I understand.
maybe something else.
But
So,
they've got their view of the world, too.
thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, OEC team. We appreciate it.
Mayor
Thank
Clark.
you, District. Yes, ma'am.
Cindy Hathaway with Littleton Fire Protection District. I do just want to tag on to what Terry said, since he said it so very well. We too consider our relationship a partnership, and I want to applaud everybody that was involved in this, both OEC, the fire department, and certainly everybody out in the field. You did an excellent job, so thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay, that's it for this portion of the meeting. I have a couple small items with council's indulgence I'd like to bring up about other issues. And one is, Suzanne sent me a letter, an email about possible changes to our ordinances for wind turbines, similar to what we did for solar power.
Say again, please.
Probably a cell phone. That's fine. I mean, I'm not saying when it goes on. Obviously, it should be. It's one of our 1,000 high priority items. And second issue. Could you stand back for just 2 more minutes? Second issue is tour of the Spotswood building. We probably need to do that during daylight. Can you just schedule that with the council? And I know Rebecca Cast wanted to be notified on when that was happening. She wants to go.
Tour of what?
The Spotswood building, Spotswood and Littleton Boulevard at the...
What's everybody doing Christmas Eve? You want to kind of
Good time.
I was thinking a little before that.
do some caroling while we're down there?
Sometime next week would be fine with me. I don't know what you
Okay.
guys' schedule is.
All right, we'll set something up. Well, I'll just have Marlene
Send
suggest
something
some
out and see
times
what-
and see who can make it. And,
Okay.
Okay, and Becky Cass would like to be there too?
Yes.
Okay.
Pick a warm day, because it's probably cold.
Yes, sir, okay, well, we'll look at the forecast.
And any other business? In that case, we are adjourned.